You're standing at your own wedding reception, 200 guests watching, when your new mother-in-law grabs the microphone and announces to everyone that you're not good enough for her son because you're a single mom. That happened to me 6 months ago, and what I'm about to tell you will restore your faith in love and family. My name is Serena Walsh, and I'm a 32-year-old pediatric nurse who thought I'd found my happily ever after with Marcus Thompson, a firefighter who swept me off my feet 2 years ago. Marcus didn't just fall in love with me, he fell head over heels for my 8-year-old daughter Ivy, too. She's this incredible little girl with curly red hair and freckles who can make anyone smile, even after the longest shift at the hospital. But Marcus's mother, Dolores Thompson, made it crystal clear from day one that she thought her precious son was making the biggest mistake of his life by marrying someone with baggage. Dolores is one of those women who smiles sweetly while delivering the most cutting remarks you've ever heard. She's 58, retired from working as an insurance agent, and has this way of making you feel 2 inches tall with just a look. The tension in our family was impossible to ignore. My best friend Tessa, who became my maid of honor, witnessed Dolores's behavior firsthand at family dinners where she'd make comments like, "Well, I suppose not everyone gets to start fresh," or "Marcus has always been too generous for his own good." Even Marcus's brother Dane, who's usually the peacekeeper of the family, would shift uncomfortably when his mother started her passive-aggressive attacks. But here's what Dolores didn't know, and what made this story one I'll never forget. Marcus had been watching, listening, and planning. He knew exactly what kind of person his mother was, and he'd prepared for the possibility that she might try to humiliate me on our wedding day. What he did next, and how my little Ivy became the hero of our story, will blow your mind. I'm about to tell you how a letter written by my husband and delivered by my 8-year-old daughter turned what should have been the most humiliating moment of my life into something that left 200 wedding guests in tears and changed our family forever. This isn't just a story about standing up to bullies. It's about what happens when someone loves you so completely that they're willing to fight for your worth even when you can't fight for yourself. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding how Marcus and I met will help you appreciate just how calculated and cruel Dolores's attack really was. 2 years ago, I was juggling 12-hour shifts at Children's Memorial Hospital with single motherhood, barely keeping my head above water. Ivy was 6 then, and I was constantly worried I wasn't giving her enough attention between work, school pickups, and the exhaustion that comes with doing everything alone. My ex-husband had walked out when Ivy was 3, deciding that fatherhood wasn't for him, leaving me to rebuild our lives from scratch. That October, the fire department came to Ivy's elementary school for a safety demonstration. I was running late after a particularly brutal night shift, still in my scrubs, when I rushed into the gymnasium to find Ivy sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely mesmerized by this tall firefighter who was showing the kids how to stop, drop, and roll. Marcus had this way of commanding attention without raising his voice, and when he smiled at the children, his whole face lit up. After the presentation, Ivy ran up to me bubbling with excitement. "Mom, did you see the fireman? He said I asked the smartest question about fire safety." I looked over to see Marcus walking toward us, and when our eyes met, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just attraction, but a sense of safety, like maybe the world wasn't such a scary place to navigate alone. Marcus introduced himself and complimented Ivy's curiosity. Instead of the usual adult small talk, he crouched down to her level and asked about her favorite subjects in school. When she told him she loved reading, he promised to bring her a book about firefighters the next time he visited the school. That's when I knew he was different from every other man I'd dated since my divorce. Our first official date wasn't dinner and a movie. Marcus suggested a family-friendly afternoon at the Science Museum because, as he put it, "If we're going to do this, I want to get to know both of you." I watched him spend 3 hours patiently explaining exhibits to Ivy, celebrating her excitement over every discovery, never once acting like her presence was an inconvenience. By the end of the day, Ivy was holding his hand as naturally as she held mine. Over the following months, Marcus integrated himself into our lives so seamlessly, it felt like he'd always been there. He showed up for Ivy's school plays, helped with homework, and learned to braid her hair better than I could. When she had nightmares, Marcus would tell her stories about brave firefighters who kept everyone safe. When I worked night shifts, he'd stay over to make sure Ivy wasn't alone, reading her bedtime stories and making pancakes in the morning. The proposal came 6 months ago at Ivy's school carnival. Marcus had coordinated with her teacher to set up a special booth where Ivy got to help him ask me to marry him. She presented me with a ring pop while Marcus got down on one knee with the real thing, asking if he could officially become her second dad. Ivy's squeal of delight probably could be heard 3 blocks away. But from the moment Marcus brought me home to meet his family, Dolores made her disapproval crystal clear. The first thing she said to me wasn't "nice to meet you" or "welcome to the family." She looked me up and down and asked, "So how long were you married before?" When I explained that my ex-husband had left when Ivy was young, she nodded knowingly and said, "Well, that explains a lot about why you ended up alone." Family dinners became exercises in endurance. Dolores would make comments about how challenging it must be for Marcus to take on someone else's responsibilities. She'd ask pointed questions about my work schedule, wondering aloud how I could possibly give Marcus the attention he deserved when I was so focused on that child. She even suggested that maybe we should wait a few more years to get married, until Ivy was older and less dependent. Marcus defended me every time, but I could see the strain it put on him. Dane would try to change the subject, and Tessa, who came to a few family gatherings, would literally bite her tongue to keep from snapping back. The worst part was that Dolores was always sweet as pie to Ivy's face, which made her comments about my daughter even more infuriating. As our wedding day approached, my anxiety reached an all-time high. I confided in Tessa that I was terrified Dolores would find a way to ruin our special day. What if she objects during the ceremony? What if she makes a scene at the reception? I asked her during my final dress fitting. Tessa assured me that Marcus would handle his mother, but deep down, I knew Dolores was planning something. The morning of our wedding, as I sat getting my makeup done, I tried to push away the knot in my stomach. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Dolores was going to make sure I remembered it for all the wrong reasons. The ceremony itself was absolutely perfect, like something out of a fairy tale. Marcus looked so handsome in his navy suit, and when I walked down the aisle with Ivy by my side as my flower girl, I saw tears in his eyes. Dolores sat in the front row wearing black, which should have been my first warning, but I was too caught up in the magic of the moment to care. We exchanged vows under a beautiful archway of white roses and baby's breath. Marcus's words were so heartfelt that half the congregation was crying, including Tessa, who was trying not to smudge her mascara. When he promised to love and protect both Ivy and me for the rest of his life, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Even Dolores managed to smile during the ceremony, though it looked more like she was gritting her teeth. The reception started off wonderfully. Our venue was this charming restored barn with string lights everywhere, creating the most romantic atmosphere. Ivy was having the time of her life, spinning around the dance floor in her pale pink dress, her curls bouncing with every twirl. She made friends with the other children immediately and spent the cocktail hour teaching them how to do cartwheels on the lawn. During our first dance to At Last by Etta James, Marcus whispered in my ear, "See? Everything's perfect. Stop worrying about my mother." I let myself relax into his arms, feeling the stress of the past few months melting away. When the song ended, Ivy ran up and insisted on a family dance, so the 3 of us swayed together while the photographer captured what I thought would be my favorite moment of the day. Dinner went smoothly with everyone raving about the herb-crusted chicken and laughing at Dane's stories about Marcus's childhood mishaps. Ivy sat at the head table between Marcus and me, proudly wearing the special necklace Marcus had given her that morning with a heart charm that read, "Daddy's Girl." She was chattering away to anyone who would listen about how excited she was to have a new daddy and maybe get a baby brother or sister someday. Then came the traditional speech portion of the evening, and my stomach started to tighten again. Dane stood up first and delivered the most beautiful best man speech about how he'd never seen his brother happier than he'd been since meeting me. He talked about watching Marcus transform from a confirmed bachelor into a devoted family man, and how Ivy had brought out a side of Marcus that even his own family had never seen. Tessa followed with her maid of honor speech, telling the story of how she'd watched me struggle as a single mother and how amazing it was to see me finally find someone who appreciated my strength instead of seeing it as a burden. She raised her glass to the man who saw Serena and Ivy as a package deal and said, "Jackpot." The whole room erupted in applause and laughter. I was starting to think we'd made it through the danger zone when Dolores suddenly pushed back her chair and stood up. My heart dropped into my stomach. Marcus immediately tensed beside me, and I saw Dane's face go pale. Tessa actually half rose from her seat, ready to intervene, but Dolores had already walked to the front of the room with purpose. She approached the DJ and held out her hand for the microphone. "I'd like to say a few words about my son," she announced with that saccharine smile I'd come to dread. The room fell silent, sensing the shift in energy. Marcus started to stand, but Dolores waved him back down with false cheerfulness. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Marcus today," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "My son has always been special to me. He's kind, generous, and caring to a fault. Sometimes too caring, if you ask me." My hands started trembling in my lap. Ivy, who had been coloring on her kid's menu, looked up with curiosity at the sudden change in atmosphere. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Marcus deserves the very best in life," Dolores continued, her smile never wavering even as her words grew sharper. "He deserves a woman who can give him everything he needs, everything he dreams of. He deserves someone who can focus completely on him and their future together." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I realized where this was headed. Marcus was gripping his napkin so tightly his knuckles were white. Then Dolores delivered the blow that I'll never forget. He deserves a real woman who can give him a fresh start, not someone who comes with another man's child as baggage. A single mother will never be able to love him completely because she'll always put that child first. My son deserves better than second place in his own marriage. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 guests sat frozen, unsure whether they'd actually heard what they thought they'd heard. Several people gasped audibly. Tessa jumped to her feet, her face red with fury. Marcus looked like he was about to explode. But before anyone could react, something extraordinary happened. Ivy quietly set down her crayons and walked toward the front of the room. What I'm about to tell you shows just how well Marcus knew his mother and how much he loved us. 2 weeks before our wedding, while I was stressing about centerpieces and seating charts, Marcus was quietly preparing for psychological warfare. It happened on a Sunday afternoon when I was pulling an extra shift at the hospital. Marcus had taken Ivy to the park, and when I got home that evening, I found them sitting together on the couch, having what looked like a very serious conversation. Ivy's face was unusually thoughtful, and Marcus had that protective expression he got whenever someone had hurt one of us. "Everything okay?" I asked, settling down beside them. Marcus smiled and ruffled Ivy's hair, but I caught the look that passed between them, like they were sharing a secret. "Just talking about grown-up stuff," he said casually. "You know how sometimes adults say things that aren't very nice when they're scared or worried?" I didn't think much of it at the time. Marcus was always having these deep conversations with Ivy, helping her understand the world in age-appropriate ways. He'd explained everything from why her biological father left to why some kids at school might say mean things about having divorced parents. I trusted his judgment completely when it came to preparing her for life's challenges. What I didn't know was that Marcus had been watching his mother's behavior escalate as our wedding approached. At our rehearsal dinner just 3 days earlier, Dolores had cornered Tessa in the bathroom and made some comment about how unfortunate it was that Marcus was throwing his life away. She'd also asked Dane if he thought there was any way to talk sense into Marcus before it's too late. Marcus had grown up with Dolores. He knew her patterns, her triggers, and most importantly, her need to be the center of attention. He'd witnessed her dramatic outbursts at family gatherings for 35 years. The woman who had objected to every girlfriend he'd ever brought home, who had found fault with every major decision he'd made, was not going to let his wedding day pass without making her feelings known. So Marcus made a decision that showed just how much he understood both his mother and our family dynamic. He sat Ivy down and explained that sometimes people say hurtful things at weddings, especially about families that look different from what they expected. He told her that Grandma Dolores might be scared about changes in the family and might say something unkind about me or about her. "But here's the thing, sweetheart," he'd said to Ivy that Sunday afternoon. "If anyone ever tries to make your mom feel bad or make you feel like you don't belong in our family, I want you to know that I'll always stand up for both of you. In fact, I'm going to give you something special just in case." That's when Marcus pulled out a sealed envelope with Ivy's name written on it in his careful handwriting. Inside was a letter he'd spent hours crafting, choosing every word carefully to express exactly how he felt about our family and his commitment to us. "This is a very important letter," he told her, his voice serious but not scary. "If Grandma Dolores or anyone else ever says something mean about your mom at our wedding, I want you to take this letter, ask for the microphone, and read it out loud to everyone. Can you do that for me?" Ivy had nodded solemnly, understanding that this was a big responsibility. Marcus made sure she knew exactly what to do: walk calmly to the front, politely ask for the microphone, announce that her new daddy had asked her to read something, and then read every word clearly and loudly. They practiced it twice that afternoon, with Marcus playing the role of someone saying mean things and Ivy practicing her response. He made sure she understood that this wasn't about being scary or confrontational, but about sharing the truth with everyone who cared about our family. The envelope went into Ivy's special purse, the little white beaded bag that matched her flower girl dress. Marcus told her to keep it with her during the reception, just in case. He even had Tessa discreetly check that Ivy had it with her when we arrived at the venue. The brilliant part of Marcus's plan was that he knew his mother's psychology. Dolores thrived on shock value and drama, but she was also a coward who wilted when confronted directly. She could dish out cruelty when she thought she had the upper hand, but she crumbled when faced with consequences for her actions. Marcus also understood that anything he said in response to his mother's attack would look like a son defending his new wife, which Dolores could dismiss or twist. But having his words delivered by Ivy, the very child she was attacking, would be devastating and undeniable. As I watched my 8-year-old daughter walk confidently toward that microphone, clutching her little purse, I realized that the man I'd just married had been protecting us in ways I never even knew we needed protection. The sight of my 8-year-old daughter walking toward that microphone while 200 guests held their collective breath is burned into my memory forever. Ivy moved with such quiet confidence, her little white beaded purse clutched in one hand, her chin held high despite being the smallest person in that massive room. Dolores was still standing at the front, frozen in shock at seeing Ivy approach. The woman who had just delivered the most devastating public humiliation of my life suddenly looked uncertain, like she hadn't expected any kind of response, especially not from a child. Several guests were whispering to each other, clearly wondering what was happening. Ivy walked right up to Dolores and looked up at her with those big green eyes. In the clearest, most polite voice you've ever heard, she said, "Excuse me, Grandma Dolores, may I please have the microphone? My new daddy Marcus asked me to read something if anyone said mean things about my mom." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Dolores's face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds, from confusion to horror to panic, as she realized she'd been outmaneuvered by an 8-year-old. Her hand shook slightly as she passed the microphone down to Ivy, who took it with both hands and held it close to her mouth, just like Marcus had taught her. "Hi, everyone," Ivy began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "My name is Ivy, and I'm the flower girl. My new daddy Marcus wrote me a letter and told me to read it if someone said anything mean about my mom. So here it is." She opened the envelope with careful fingers, unfolded the letter, and began to read in that serious way children have when they know something is important. "Dear wedding guests, if you're hearing this letter, it means someone at our celebration has questioned whether Serena deserves to be my wife, or whether our family is somehow less than perfect. Let me be absolutely clear about something. I did not settle when I married Serena. I hit the jackpot. The first few words hit the room like a thunderbolt. People started leaning forward in their seats, and I saw several guests already tearing up. Marcus was watching Ivy with such pride and love that I felt my heart might burst. Ivy continued reading. Serena is not damaged goods. She is not a consolation prize. She is not someone who comes with baggage. Serena is a woman who loved her daughter so much that she found the courage to leave a marriage that wasn't working to give Ivy a better life. She worked night shifts as a pediatric nurse, taking care of sick children while her own daughter slept, just to keep them afloat. She went back to school, built a career, and created a home where Ivy could feel safe and loved. My hands were pressed to my mouth, tears streaming down my face. Around the room, I could see people nodding, some wiping their eyes. Even some of Dolores's friends looked uncomfortable with what she had said. When I met Serena and Ivy read on, her voice growing stronger with each word, I didn't see a woman with complications. I saw a family that already knew how to love unconditionally. Ivy didn't come with Serena as an obligation or a burden. She came as a gift. I'm not taking on someone else's child. I'm being welcomed into a family that's going to teach me what real love looks like. The emotion in that room was overwhelming. Tessa was openly sobbing. Dane had his head in his hands, clearly mortified by his mother's behavior. Several of Marcus's firefighter buddies were nodding approvingly, and I could see Ivy's teacher from school beaming with pride. But Ivy wasn't finished. She took a breath and delivered the final blow. To anyone who thinks Serena should put me before Ivy, you don't understand what kind of man I am. I fell in love with Serena exactly because she puts Ivy first. That's not a flaw. That's the kind of mother I want for all our future children. That's the kind of love I want to be part of. Serena doesn't love me less because she loves Ivy completely. She loves me more because she's already proven she knows how to love someone with her whole heart. The silence that followed was profound. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire reception erupted in thunderous applause. People were standing, cheering, some actually whooping with joy. Tessa was on her feet yelling, "Yes!" like she was at a football game. Ivy looked around at all the applause with wide eyes, clearly surprised by the reaction. She carefully folded the letter back up, put it in her purse, and then did something that made everyone laugh and cheer even louder. She walked over to me, climbed up on my lap, and said into the microphone, "Also, my mom makes the best pancakes ever, so Daddy Marcus is really lucky." The room exploded with laughter and more applause. Dolores had disappeared completely, probably slipping out during the speech. But honestly, in that moment, I didn't care where she'd gone. My daughter had just defended our family with more grace and power than I ever could have managed. The immediate aftermath of Ivy's speech was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. As the applause finally died down, guests started approaching our table in waves, wanting to congratulate us and share their own stories. Marcus's fire chief came over first, shaking Marcus's hand and telling him that was the finest piece of leadership he'd ever witnessed. "You protected your family without throwing anyone under the bus," he said. "That takes real character." What struck me most was how many people opened up about their own blended families. The couple from Marcus's station house told us about the challenges they'd faced when he adopted her 3 children from a previous marriage. My colleague from the hospital shared how her stepfather had saved her life by choosing to love her unconditionally after her mother remarried. Even some of the older guests, who I'd worried might judge us, came over to share stories of family members who'd found love the second time around. Ivy was absolutely glowing from all the attention. She spent the rest of the reception being treated like a celebrity, with other children asking her to read the letter again and adults telling her how brave she was. Marcus scooped her up at one point and whispered something in her ear that made her giggle. And when I asked what he'd said, she announced proudly, "Daddy said I did good protecting our family." Tessa was practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you see Dolores's face?" She kept asking anyone who would listen. That woman didn't know what hit her. An 8-year-old just delivered the most devastating takedown in wedding history. She made sure the photographer got pictures of Ivy holding the letter, saying it needed to be preserved for posterity. Dolores had indeed vanished completely. Dane came over about an hour later, looking absolutely mortified, to apologize for his mother's behavior. "I've never been more ashamed of a family member in my life," he said. "What she did was unforgivable, and what you three did in response was pure class." He promised to handle any fallout with his mother and made it clear that we had his complete support. The rest of our wedding was magical in a way I never could have imagined. Instead of being remembered as the reception where the mother-in-law caused drama, it became the celebration where a little girl stood up for love and family in the most beautiful way possible. People danced later, laughed harder, and celebrated more joyfully because they'd witnessed something truly special. But the real test came in the weeks and months that followed. For about 2 months, we heard nothing from Dolores. Marcus was actually relieved, saying it gave us time to settle into married life without her negativity. We moved into a bigger house where Ivy could have her own room, and I watched my daughter bloom as she adjusted to having a full-time father figure who genuinely adored her. Then, around Thanksgiving, Dolores called Marcus. She was crying, which apparently was extremely rare for her. She asked if she could come over to talk, not to Marcus alone, but to all three of us. When she arrived, she looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than the woman who had terrorized our wedding day. Her apology was genuine and detailed. She admitted that she'd been terrified of losing her son, that she'd convinced herself that if Marcus focused on Ivy and me, there wouldn't be room for her in his life anymore. She acknowledged that her behavior had been cruel and that she'd tried to destroy something beautiful because she was scared of being left behind. What surprised me most was her direct apology to Ivy. She got down on Ivy's level and said, "I said some very mean things about you and your mama, and that was wrong. You're not baggage. You're a gift, just like your daddy's letter said." She asked Ivy if she could try to be a better grandma, and Ivy, with the generous heart that children have, said yes. The relationship rebuild has been slow but steady. Dolores now comes to Ivy's school events and has learned to ask about her day with genuine interest. She still has moments where her old controlling nature surfaces, but now Marcus shuts it down immediately, and surprisingly, she backs off. 6 months after our wedding, Marcus and I got the most wonderful news. I'm pregnant with our first child together, and Ivy is over the moon about becoming a big sister. When we told Dolores, she cried again, but this time with joy. She's already making plans to help with the baby and keeps asking Ivy what kind of grandmother she wants her to be. That letter from our wedding day now hangs framed in our living room, not as a reminder of conflict, but as a testament to the power of love and preparation. It taught me that the right person doesn't just accept your past, they celebrate it as the foundation of who you've become. The most important lesson from that day wasn't about standing up to bullies or defending your family, though those things matter. It was about recognizing that love multiplies rather than divides. Marcus didn't love me less because I came with Ivy. He loved me more because I'd already proven I knew how to love completely and sacrifice for family. Sometimes the people who seem determined to tear you down are just scared of being forgotten. And sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply telling the truth with love. If you've made it this far in my story, it probably means you've either experienced something similar or you're someone who believes in the power of love to overcome fear and cruelty. Either way, I'm grateful you listened. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own journey with blended families, love after heartbreak, or standing up to people who try to tear you down, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below telling me about your own experiences with finding love in unexpected places, or dealing with family members who don't understand your choices. And if you want to hear more stories about real people navigating the messy, beautiful, complicated world of modern relationships and family dynamics, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. These aren't just stories, they're reminders that love wins, truth matters, and sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful messages. Thank you for being part of our family's story. Until next time, remember that you deserve someone who doesn't just accept your past, but celebrates it as the reason you became strong enough to love them completely.